The memorial service for my husband had just ended when my mother-in-law swept in to declare her takeover of the corporation. In the midst of my panic, my phone vibrated. He wasn't dead. Let her do it, Ellie. I've planned for this. Asterisk. It was a late autumn afternoon on the outskirts of Seattle, a cool wind rustling through the evergreens. The sky had just cleared after an unseasonable downpour. The city lights began to flicker on early, and the scent of roasting coffee from a nearby cafe mixed with the damp, loamy smell of the earth. It should have felt peaceful, but it was in this very peace that I stepped into a house that would teach me how to breathe silently. My name is Eleanor Vance, but everyone calls me Ellie. When I married Michael, I wasn't dreaming of marrying into wealth to change my life. I just longed for a proper home, a loving husband, a warm meal on the table, and the quiet peace that comes with closing the door at night. People say a woman marrying is like placing a bet. I told myself that hard work pays off, that if I lived with kindness, life wouldn't betray me. My husband, Michael, was a man of few words. He wasn't good at making promises, but if he said something, he did it. I remember one time I had a fever, and he drove across town to get the exact brand of medicine I always used. When he got home, he just placed the bag on the table and said something that made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. Take this, so I don't have to Google your symptoms again. I chuckled, and my heart softened. That was all it took for me to nod and fall deeper in love. My father-in-law was Arthur Vance, the man who built Vance Logistics and Construction, a name everyone in the Pacific Northwest knew. He spoke slowly, his gaze direct, the kind of man who commanded respect without ever raising his voice. Michael's mother had passed away when he was young. A few years later, his father married Victoria, who brought her own son, Dylan, to live with them. Hearing this, I simply thought, we're a family now, we should love each other. The first day I arrived at the estate, the thing I remember most is the sound of the automatic gate closing behind me with a decisive times thunk, as if sealing off any road back. The stone driveway was immaculate, the hedges trimmed into perfect spheres, and golden uplighting cast a warm glow on the white walls of the mansion. Maria, the housekeeper, led me inside, opening the doors so gently it was as if she were afraid of disturbing something invisible. Victoria emerged from the top of the grand staircase. She was beautiful in the way of a woman who meticulously maintains herself, her hair perfectly coiffed, a silk blouse, a designer watch on her wrist. She smiled, but it was a smile measured with a ruler. She looked me up and down and said, "As the new lady of this house, you'll be expected to follow our standards. This family has its way of doing things." Her voice was soft, not harsh, but I heard a clear line drawn in the sand. Cross it, and you're welcome to stay. Fail to, and you'll know your place. I lowered my head. Hello, Victoria. It's a pleasure. She gave a slight nod and turned to Michael. Take your wife up to your room to rest. Tomorrow, we'll visit your mother's grave for you to pay your respects. With that, she walked away. She didn't ask if I was tired or offer me a glass of water. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to reassure myself. Maybe this is just how wealthy mothers-in-law are. Reserved, for the sake of dignity. Dylan appeared shortly after, impeccably dressed and trailing a cloud of expensive cologne. He shook my hand with a wide grin. Ellie, welcome. The house is much livelier with you here. It sounded friendly, but his eyes flickered towards Michael for a split second, a look that was both complimentary and competitive. Michael just nodded, his expression unchanging. Once the door to our bedroom was closed, Michael let out a long sigh. He looked at me and whispered, "In this house, be polite, but don't be naive. If you see anything that seems off, tell me. Don't tell anyone else." I stared at him. Off? What do you mean? Michael paused for a moment, then gave a faint, wry smile. In a big house, even words have a price. We just need to live honestly. I'll handle the rest. That evening was the welcome dinner for the new daughter-in-law. The table was laden with a beautiful pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole. My father-in-law served me a piece of meat. Eat up, Ellie. You're a daughter to us now. His words warmed me, and my eyes stung. But just as I was about to thank him, Victoria gently set down her fork. A daughter, yes, but she must still understand her role. Michael's wife is the eldest daughter-in-law, and she must set an example. No one shouted, no one scolded, but the atmosphere at the table instantly chilled. Dylan tried to change the subject by talking about the company, while I ate slowly, afraid that even the clink of my fork would be judged as improper. Maria stood by, refilling our water glasses, her eyes downcast as if she were long accustomed to this kind of silence. That night, lying next to Michael, I listened to the steady hum of the air conditioner, but my heart was restless. My childhood home was small, but my parents were always laughing, and neighbors called out to each other from their yards. Here, everything was so beautiful, it felt cold. I turned to look at Michael and saw he was still awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as if he were calculating something far away. I lightly touched his hand. He gripped it tightly, as if afraid that if he let go, I would drift away in this vast, empty house. I told myself, asterisk, as long as we're a team, we can handle anything. As long as we hold hands, I can learn to be the daughter-in-law they need. Asterisk. But deep inside, a strange feeling, like a draft seeping through a crack in the door, was growing colder and colder. The next morning, I woke while the air was still crisp. Back home, the sound of my alarm was my mother's signal to start the coffee maker and call me for breakfast. Here, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was unnervingly clear, as if reminding me that every minute in this house was scheduled. I went down to the kitchen and found Maria already there. She glanced at me, her eyes kind but guarded. "You're new here, Mrs. Vance. Let me handle this. You should go rest." I quickly rolled up my sleeves. "Please, let me help." Maria didn't stop me, only whispering as if afraid of being overheard. "Everything here has its own way. You'll get used to it in time." Breakfast was a quiet affair. On the table were oatmeal, bagels with lox, and a small, fragrant platter of artisanal sausages. Arthur ate slowly, chewing thoughtfully, occasionally asking Michael a few questions about work. Michael's answers were concise and to the point. Victoria sat with a ramrod-straight posture, her hands holding her utensils perfectly, as if even her posture was a form of etiquette. As soon as I sat down, she glanced at her watch, then at me. "We eat breakfast at a precise time in this house. As the new bride, you should try to maintain the schedule." Her voice was still soft, still polite, but I heard an unspoken addendum. Asterisk, 1 minute late is still a failure. Asterisk. "Yes, ma'am," I murmured, lowering my head to my food. Arthur again served me, this time a piece of smoked salmon. "Get used to our ways, Ellie. Think of us as your new parents." Before I could feel a surge of emotion, Victoria interjected, her tone as smooth as poured tea. "It's good that Arthur dotes on his daughter-in-law. But affection is one thing, standards are another. The eldest son's wife must be forward-thinking, always one step ahead." I looked up and met her gaze. It wasn't sharp like a knife, but cold like a needle. She smiled without showing her teeth, but it was enough to make me sit up straighter. Dylan came down late. He walked in, his shirt smelling of fresh laundry and expensive fabric softener, his hair perfectly styled. As he pulled out his chair, he said, "Sorry, Mom, got held up." Victoria didn't scold him for his tardiness, as she had implicitly scolded me. She just asked, "Eat, then you need to get to the office." My heart sank. The same tardiness. But for me, it was about times standards asterisk. For her own son, it was being times held up asterisk. Blood is thicker than water. I remembered that from childhood squabbles with my brother. As he ate, Dylan glanced at Michael, his tone teasing, but not entirely a joke. "Big brother is so busy these days. A new wife at home, and probably no time for a honeymoon." Michael remained calm. "Work is demanding." Dylan chuckled. "I'm just kidding. Of course, you're the only one capable of carrying this weight. Who else could manage it?" The compliment sounded sweet, but the subtext was sour, as if to say, asterisk, "You're the capable one. So you do all the work while I watch from the side." Asterisk. I noticed that every time Arthur praised Michael, Victoria would pause for a beat before changing the subject. That pause was brief, but to a newcomer like me, it was as loud as a spoon hitting a bowl. In the following days, I began to learn the house rules. The tablecloth had to be perfectly straight, the dishes placed in their exact positions. The flowers on the table changed every 2 days. When guests arrived, I was not to answer the door. That was the security guard's job. Victoria never spoke loudly. She corrected me with phrases that sounded like suggestions. "You can do it that way, but in this house, we usually do it like this." Or, "What you said isn't wrong, but people might interpret it differently." Each of her sentences was a measuring stick, for everything from my posture to my smile. One day, I brought a platter of fruit to the study to light a candle in memory of Michael's mother, as instructed. After I finished, I turned around to find Victoria standing right behind me. She looked at the candle, then at my hands. When you light a candle, one hand should hold it. The other should support it. Don't let outsiders say you lack basic decorum. My face flushed. Yes, ma'am. I'll remember. She nodded and walked away, leaving behind a faint, strangely unpleasant scent of perfume. That night, Michael came home late. I had kept his dinner warm, a bowl of butternut squash soup and the pot roast Maria had made. He ate a few bites, looked at me for a long moment, and asked, "Are you tired?" I shook my head. "I'm fine. It's just, the way people talk here is so strange." Michael gave a slight smile. "It's not strange. It's just that everyone is protecting their own interests. Don't try to please everyone." I sighed. "I'm so afraid of doing something wrong." Michael put down his fork, his voice low. "You don't need to be afraid. You just need to remember that in this house, sometimes silence is safety. But silence doesn't mean ignorance." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Looking at Michael then, I suddenly understood. He wasn't an unfeeling man. He was simply a man accustomed to living in a house where every word could become evidence, and every smile could be a trap. Later that night, I stood on the landing, looking down at the living room. The chandelier was brilliant, the sofas gleaming, but the sound of footsteps echoed with an empty hollowness. I missed my parents' home terribly. Missed the sound of my mother's voice, warm and comforting, telling me to eat. The food here was delicious. The house was beautiful, but the feeling of belonging was as fragile as condensation on a window pane. People say, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." I understood that. But at that moment, I began to understand something else. Some rules aren't meant to maintain order. They're meant to maintain power. My father-in-law, Arthur, was a robust man, the kind who had been weathered by experience. Every morning, he'd drink a cup of hot tea, walk a lap around the garden, and only then would he eat. So, the day he collapsed, my mind wasn't prepared to accept it as reality. It was a Monday evening. Dinner was a sayapino, a hearty seafood stew, with crusty bread and a salad. Arthur had only eaten half his bowl when he put down his spoon and clutched his chest. Michael shot up from his chair, yelling, "Dad!" Before I could process what was happening, I saw sweat bead on Arthur's temples, his face pale as a sheet. Victoria was panicked, but her panic was strange. She didn't scream or collapse into tears. She just spoke very quickly. "Call an ambulance. Call his doctor." Then she turned to Dylan. "Get your father's medication." Michael lifted his father into his arms. I followed, my hands shaking so badly that fumbling with the car door felt impossible. At the hospital, Michael stood in the hallway, his eyes red but tearless. Victoria sat ramrod straight in a waiting room chair, her hands clenched together. Dylan paced back and forth, making calls while trying to maintain a calm facade. Around midnight, a doctor came out. "We're very sorry." Michael stood frozen, his jaw tight. I clung to his arm. It was ice cold. The funeral arrangements began immediately. A reception was set up at the house, with flowers and rows of chairs. The air was thick with hushed condolences and the scent of lilies. I wore a black dress and stood by Michael's side, following the funeral director's quiet instructions. He whispered to me, "Just stay calm and follow the proceedings. Pay your respects. We'll sort everything else out later." Michael stood at the front, his back straight as if he were carrying the entire weight of the house on his shoulders. The day of the viewing, Victoria told me to change into a more formal morning dress, fitting for the eldest daughter-in-law. "Don't cry too much in front of the guests," she advised. "We're a prominent family. People are watching." I swallowed hard. Even my tears were being graded. She added lightly, "For a woman, maintaining appearances is paramount." I could only nod, a bitter taste in my mouth. But during those days, I started to hear dissonant questions. Not questions about how my father-in-law had died, but who is signing authority now? Has the board of directors met? Where are the important company seals? Someone whispered, thinking I couldn't hear, "With Arthur Vance gone, it looks like this house is about to have a new master." I turned, and they fell silent, offering a polite, empty smile. Victoria was an expert at receiving guests, the kind of woman comfortable in front of a crowd. But as soon as the guests left, she would pull Michael into his father's study for quiet conversations. Once, I brought in a glass of water and overheard her asking, "The power of attorney your father had, do you have it? Or is it with the legal department? Whose name are the shares in?" Michael answered curtly, "Mom, let me handle it." She gave a faint smile. I'm just asking so I can support you. Don't think I'm trying to take anything. I set the water down, my heart pounding. The mourning period wasn't even over, and they were already talking about seals and shares. It was as grating as biting down on a piece of sand in a bowl of rice. Dylan changed, too. He started spending more time in the study, his clothes more formal, his voice louder when speaking to company employees. When he passed me, he still called me Ellie, but his smile was overly confident, as if he were celebrating a private victory. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone. Big brother is busy with the funeral. You can let me handle the preliminary arrangements. I stood frozen on the stairs. Asterisk preliminary arrangements. Asterisk, but his tone was that of a man about to take the throne. Another evening, Mr. Henderson, a close family friend, handed me a hot cup of ginger tea. Fire tests, gold, hardship test strength, he said. Remember what I said. Be measured in your words, and protect yourself. I nodded. I understood. In this house, one wrong word could become an excuse for anything. That night, when most people had left, Michael finally sighed in my presence. He whispered, "Don't listen to the gossip out there. Dad is gone, but he left behind many things. The most important thing is not to let people take advantage of us while we're vulnerable." I asked him if he was scared. Michael looked at me, his eyes deep pools of darkness. Of course, I'm scared, but fear doesn't keep you alive. We have to be sharp. When the guests had thinned, Michael quietly locked the file cabinets in his father's study. He looked at me and nodded, as if to remind me that from now on, we had to be more vigilant in our grief. Maria passed by and sighed softly. A great house, a great loss. But the human heart is hard to measure. Her words sent a chill down my spine. A wolf in sheep's clothing, sometimes they're not outside the gate, but right under your own roof. That night, I sat alone before the memorial portrait of my father-in-law. I looked at the photo of Arthur and felt a deep sorrow for him. He had built an empire his entire life, and the moment he closed his eyes, that empire had become a prize people were desperate to claim. I clasped my hands and whispered, "Arthur, I don't understand everything in this house yet, but I know that from today on, I have to live with my eyes wide open." That morning, the sky over Seattle was overcast, the kind of gray that hangs low at the end of the rainy season. The clouds were heavy, the air damp, the sun unable to break through. I woke earlier than usual because Michael had said he needed to go to the Cascade Mountains to survey a piece of land on a pass route. He quickly ate a bowl of oatmeal Maria had prepared, maintaining his usual neatness. A light blue button-down shirt, his watch, a leather briefcase tucked under his arm. Victoria came downstairs just as Michael was getting up. She asked, seemingly for the sake of asking, "How long will you be?" "I'll be back tonight," Michael replied. She nodded, then asked, "Are you going alone?" Michael looked at her for a beat. "Frank is coming with me." I noticed her hands slightly tightened on her napkin, but her face remained impassive. Dylan hadn't come down for breakfast yet. I didn't think much of it, only finding it strange that with such a major event in the family, he seemed like an outsider. Before leaving, Michael turned to look at me. He didn't say anything sentimental, just a simple reminder. "Stay home, eat on time. If anything seems strange, call me or call Frank." I grumbled a little. "You're driving on a mountain pass. Drive slowly, please. The weather is so unpredictable." Michael smiled faintly. "I know. Don't worry. Asterisk. Don't worry. Asterisk," he said. But when he took my hand, his grip was tighter than usual, as if he too was trying to hold on to something to keep it from slipping away. The car pulled out of the gate. I stood on the porch, watching until the taillights disappeared behind the row of fir trees. Inside, the house was still bright, still clean, still silent. So silent I could hear a single drop of water falling from the gutter outside. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Asterisk. It's just a wife's worry for her husband. Asterisk around noon. I was tidying up the memorial display when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end belonged to an office employee, speaking quickly and out of breath. "Mrs. Vance, please, stay calm. Michael, he's been in an accident." I thought I'd misheard. I asked again, my throat tight. "What did you say?" She repeated it, this time enunciating every word. "Michael's car went off a cliff on the mountain pass. Rescue teams are on the scene." I don't remember when I dropped the phone. My legs felt like jelly. Maria rushed over to support me, asking urgently, "Mrs. Vance, what is it?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. A moment later, I managed to force the words out. Michael. An accident. Maria's face went pale. She immediately called for someone to prepare a car. Victoria appeared right after. But strangely, she wasn't hysterical like she had been when Arthur passed. She asked just one question. Who reported it? I told her the employee's name. She turned and called someone, her voice as steady as if she were handling a business contract. Get a team to the scene. Have legal call the insurance company. I stood there, rooted to the spot. My mind had only one thought. Asterisk, is Michael alive? Asterisk, Mr. Henderson was there too. His face darkened. He told me, sit down, Ellie. Take a breath. That mountain pass is treacherous this time of year. His words made my heart plummet. I looked up at Arthur's portrait, the scent of memorial flowers still lingering. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. Frank called. His voice was hoarse, mixed with the sound of whistling wind. Ellie, I'm at the scene. It's raining hard up here. The fog is thick. The car is totaled. They're trying to rappel down. I clutched the phone, my questions tumbling out. Did they find Michael? Did they find him? Frank was silent for a few seconds, then said, not yet. They've only found his wallet and his watch. The word watch hit me like a physical blow. Michael always wore that watch, a gift from his father, like a good luck charm. He never took it off. I couldn't hear what else was said on the other end. My ears were ringing and my vision tunneled. I just managed to grab the edge of a table to keep from falling. Victoria stood nearby, still not crying. She just said, not to me, but perhaps to herself. If he can't be found, we'll have to make arrangements for a service. We can't let the company fall into disarray. I whipped my head around to look at her. I wanted to ask, asterisk Victoria, are you even human? Asterisk, but the words were stuck in my throat. In that moment, I understood something terrifying. For some people, a life lost might be a tragedy, but power lost was the real fear. The afternoon faded quickly. The rain started in earnest. Heavy drops drumming on the skylight, like a debt collector knocking at the door. I sat in the living room, a cold cup of tea in front of me, my phone on my lap. Every time the screen lit up, my heart leaped. I prayed to God, prayed to things I didn't even believe in, just for one call saying they'd found him. Dead or alive, I just needed to know. But late into the evening, Frank only texted, asterisk, no sign of him yet. Difficult terrain. They say the chances are low. Asterisk, I read the word times low asterisk, and hot tears streamed down my face. I didn't wail. I just sat there, listening to the rain and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick was like a slow, merciless cut. That night, in the brightly lit mansion, I felt truly alone for the first time. Not alone because I was by myself, but because I knew that from this moment on, I might have lost my husband, and I would have to face the things in this family that I had only ever dared to glance at before. The next morning, the rain continued, a persistent drizzle that didn't pour but seemed to intentionally prolong the exhaustion. I had barely slept. My eyes were stinging, my throat dry. I kept my phone in my hand, waiting for another message from Frank. But all I got were short, increasingly cold updates. Asterisk, continuing the search. Heavy fog. The river is running fast. Asterisk. Around noon, Mr. Henderson came and sat beside me, his voice low. If there's still no news by this afternoon, the family will have to hold a memorial service. Not because we believe Michael is gone, but for the sake of propriety. For our business partners. For the company. I looked at him, wanting to argue, but my lips just trembled. I understood the customs. Life had to go on. A loss couldn't be left in limbo. But understanding was one thing, accepting it was another. Asterisk. Respect for the dead. Asterisk. That phrase suddenly felt like a blade. Maria and the other staff began to clear the grand hall. Chairs were arranged in rows. Wreaths of white flowers were delivered. The scent of lilies and chrysanthemums mixing with the smell of fresh candles, making the air feel suffocating. I saw them set up a casket, a symbolic one. Inside, there was no body, only the suit Michael often wore to meetings, his leather wallet, and the watch they had recovered from the scene. I stared at that watch, my heart constricting. I remembered it clearly. On our wedding day, he wore it as he stood before my family, bowing his head and vowing, I promised to love and cherish Ellie. Now, it lay silent in a glass box, cold as a broken promise. The memorial photo of Michael was one of him smiling warmly on the day he opened a new warehouse in Tacoma. That smile made the pain even worse because it wasn't a posed smile. Michael rarely smiled, but when he did, his eyes softened. Looking at the photo, I felt as if he had just left for a business trip and would walk through the door any minute, chiding me for standing there dazed like a child. I wore a black morning dress. The fabric felt rough against my skin, both itchy and abrasive, as if reminding me this wasn't a dream. My parents came. The moment my mother saw me, she hugged me tightly and sobbed. My father stood silently behind her, his eyes red. I heard my mother choke out, "My dear, how could this happen?" I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't even hold myself together. Business partners, company employees, distant relatives, they all came. Everyone was in shock. The head of HR at the corporation dabbed her eyes as she paid her respects. Michael was such a good man. Ellie. A few of the warehouse foremen bowed their heads, saying nothing, but their calloused hands trembled slightly as they clasped them. Looking at them, my heart ached even more. Michael wasn't just my husband. He was the man who supported so many families, who held so much trust. But throughout the service, one person was conspicuously absent: Victoria. At first, I thought she was too grief-stricken to come out. Then I remembered her strange composure when Arthur died, and a sense of unease grew. I heard relatives whispering in the courtyard. What kind of mother doesn't even show her face when her stepson has had such a tragedy? Someone else whispered, "Maybe she's busy." But what could be more important than this? The whispers buzzed in my ears. I wanted to scream, asterisk, "Stop talking," asterisk, but I didn't have the strength. Dylan acted as the family representative, receiving guests. He wore a black suit, his hair neatly combed, his expression appropriately somber. He bowed to relatives, shook hands with partners, thanked everyone individually. He looked the part, but the more I watched him, the less he seemed like a brother who had just lost his sibling. Dylan's eyes weren't empty like mine. They were bright, calculating, as if he were planning his next move. Mr. Henderson came to my side and whispered, "Just stand here. Don't react. People are watching." I nodded. I knew that, at a time like this, any strong reaction could be misinterpreted. I tried to maintain the dazed look of a woman who had just lost her husband. Because, in my heart, that's exactly what I was. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, and the sky darkened quickly. The wind rustled through the white ribbons hanging along the hall, making them flutter. The low hum of prayers felt like waves, but inside me, there was only emptiness. I stood before the symbolic casket, watching the smoke from the candles curl and dissipate, and suddenly, my life felt just as ephemeral. I was paying my respects to a man whose body I hadn't seen. The feeling wasn't just ordinary pain. It was a suspended agony, like being forced to stand on a cliff's edge, forbidden from both hope and despair. The official service concluded as dusk settled. The visitors thinned out. The staff began to clear the chairs and gather the wreaths. My parents wanted to take me home with them, but I shook my head. I didn't know where home was anymore. Our bedroom still held the scent of Michael's clothes. I was afraid that if I stepped inside, I would completely collapse. I just stood there, looking at his portrait, listening to the wind and the shuffling of feet. In my mind, there was only one question. Asterisk. If you're still alive, where are you? Asterisk. The question twisted inside me like a needle. And just when I thought I had no more tears left to cry, I glanced at the grandfather clock. The minute hand ticked forward. The entire house suddenly became unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. I didn't know that in just a few minutes, the estate gates would open, and the people who arrived after the funeral would not be carrying tears, but something colder than memorial smoke: ambition. I was still standing before Michael's portrait as the staff began clearing away the last of the chairs. It wasn't that I wanted to appear strong. My legs simply wouldn't obey me anymore. Maria moved about silently, occasionally glancing at me before looking down again. Mr. Henderson told me to go rest. I just shook my head. I was afraid to leave the hall, afraid to face the empty bedroom, afraid the lingering scent of Michael's cologne on the pillow would make me break down completely. The prayers had faded, but the scent of lilies and candle wax still hung in the air under the dim yellow lights. In the courtyard, the wind rustled through the white memorial ribbons, making them flutter like someone sighing. I could hear the swish of a broom on the floor, the clink of glasses being collected, all normal sounds that felt like they were happening in a cold, surreal dream. And then, just as I glanced at the grandfather clock and the minute hand ticked past another mark, the estate gate buzzed open. The sound was so sharp and clear in the silence that it made me flinch. Everyone in the house turned in unison. Maria froze, the broom in her hand still. Mr. Henderson frowned and stepped out onto the porch. Victoria appeared. She wasn't wearing morning clothes. She was in a chic black power suit, her hair in a low bun, her makeup just enough to hide any fatigue. Following her were Dylan, Jessica, and a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase, the kind of man you instantly recognize as a lawyer. Two senior managers from the corporation, whom I had seen on a few occasions and who always seemed to shadow Victoria, were with them as well. I stood motionless. My mind didn't have time to form the question. Asterisk. Where were you all day? Asterisk. I just felt a strange, unnameable sensation. Like when you've just turned off the lights to sleep and you hear the deadbolt on your door click open. Victoria walked straight into the hall. Not slowly, not hesitantly. She glanced at Michael's portrait, her eyes as cold and impersonal as if she were looking at a sign. Then she turned to face everyone, her voice clear, not loud, but loud enough for all to hear. The formalities are over. The dead are gone, and while we grieve, the living must go on. The company cannot be left without leadership. An enterprise with thousands of employees cannot be thrown into chaos because of one incident. She said the phrase "the dead are gone" as smoothly as if she were reading a financial report. I felt my throat go dry. She continued, I will temporarily oversee family matters and coordinate to stabilize the corporation. Tomorrow, I will convene the executive committee, the legal department, and all relevant divisions. During this transition period, Dylan will represent the family in working with the various departments. Dylan stood beside her, his chin slightly raised. Jessica scanned the room, her eyes sharp, as if checking for any potential dissent. An elderly uncle, a distant relative, shot to his feet, his voice trembling with anger. Victoria, what are you talking about? Your son, no. Your stepson has had a terrible accident. We haven't even found him. And you dare stand here delegating tasks, like it's a board meeting? Victoria didn't flinch. She looked at him and gave a faint, cold smile. Uncle, I am grieving just as you are. But grief doesn't fulfill contracts or pay our workers' salaries. People have the right to mourn, but they also have a right to demand stability. I am doing this for the honor of this family. I heard the word honor and wanted to scream. What honor? The honor of a mother who didn't even light a candle for her stepson all day, or the honor of someone more afraid of losing her position than losing a person. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his tone still respectful. Victoria, you can't just take over the corporation like this. There's a board of directors, there are procedures. Victoria cut him off, still polite but firm. Don't worry, Henderson. I have my lawyer here. We will do everything by the book. I have no intention of breaking any laws. The man in the gray suit nodded slightly, opening his briefcase as if preparing to present documents. I looked at that briefcase, and a chill went through me. The scent of memorial flowers hadn't even dissipated. The echo of prayers still lingered, and they had already brought legal papers, like bringing knives to a kitchen that was still in shock. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't argue. I just looked at Victoria and saw that in her eyes, there wasn't a trace of sorrow for Michael, only the impatience of someone afraid of letting an opportunity slip away. In that exact moment, the phone in the pocket of my morning dress vibrated. It was a very slight vibration, but it felt like a knock against my ribs. I slipped my hand into my pocket, thinking it was a condolence message. The screen lit up, displaying the name I knew by heart. Asterisk Michael. Asterisk I froze. My heart stopping for a beat before hammering against my chest. So hard, my ears began to ring. My fingers trembled so much I had to tap the screen twice to open the message. It was a single, chillingly short line. Asterisk I'm not dead. Let her do what she wants. I've planned for this. Don't let anyone know. If you want to see me, go to the old family plot behind the woods. Asterisk I read it once, twice, 3 times. My vision swam. My first feeling wasn't relief, but a creeping sense of dread. I had just stood before his portrait, mourned him, and now he was texting me that he was alive. In that hall filled with the scent of lilies and grief, under the pale yellow lights, next to the sound of my mother-in-law carving up power, that text message felt like a cold hand reaching up from underwater to grab my ankle. I looked up. Victoria was still talking about stability, signing authority, and responsibility. Dylan stood beside her, his eyes flicking towards me with a hint of suspicion. Jessica was like a cat that had smelled something strange, her gaze sharper than before. I immediately turned off the screen, clenching the phone so tightly in my hand it hurt. I forced my face to remain dazed, numb, just as it had been all along, like a woman who had run out of all emotion. In my mind, there was only one thought, asterisk. If Michael is alive, then someone in this house tried very hard to make him dead, and fast. Asterisk asterisk. The innocent have nothing to fear. Asterisk. The old saying popped into my head, but then a bitter taste filled my mouth. Sometimes, the innocent are the ones cut down at the roots, simply because they are standing where someone else wants to stand. I took a deep breath, bowed my head as if about to faint, and whispered to Maria, "I'm not feeling well. I need to step away for a moment." My voice was hoarse, but just authentic enough not to arouse suspicion. Maria moved to help me, but I gave a slight shake of my head, signaling her not to make a scene. I walked slowly towards the hallway, each step feeling like I was treading on soft earth. In my pocket, the phone was hot against my leg, and in my chest, a fire had just been lit, a fire I had to suppress. I knew that if I let even a single spark show, I would instantly become their prey. I had barely stepped out of the main hall when my heart began to pound like a drum. But I couldn't run, couldn't panic. In this house, even a hasty glance over your shoulder was enough for them to smell a secret. As I passed the staircase, I forced my shoulders to relax, my hands still gripping the phone in my pocket. Maria looked at me with a flicker of concern. I didn't dare say much, just gave a slight shake of my head as if to say, asterisk, I can manage. Asterisk. She hesitated, then turned back to her work. But I saw her hand tremble slightly. As soon as I was out of the main corridor, Frank was waiting by a side door. He was wearing a thin rain jacket, his hair still damp, his face tense as a drawn bowstring. I didn't look at him for long, just whispered, "Are you sure?" Frank's reply was curt. "Don't ask questions. Just follow me. Walk calmly, as if you're just going out to the garden." I nodded. From the hall, I could still hear Victoria's voice, steady as if she were closing a deal, something about an executive meeting, stabilizing staff, and not letting competitors see them as weak. The words drifted towards me, and my heart ached. If Michael was alive, this scene was even more terrifying. They were fighting over the throne right under the memorial portrait of a man who was still breathing. It was like burying him alive. Frank opened the side door. A gust of damp air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. The path behind the mansion was a small stone walkway, leading to an open lawn before winding up a wooded hill. I pulled my black scarf tighter, keeping my head down like someone exhausted. Frank walked half a step ahead, close enough to shield me if someone looked out, but far enough that we wouldn't seem too familiar. Once we were out of the brightly lit area, the darkness enveloped us with surprising speed. The sky was turning a deep bruised purple, the ground was soft, and my shoes sank slightly with a squelching sound. I didn't dare look back at the house, afraid I'd meet someone's gaze in a window. One curious glance could shatter everything like a porcelain cup on a stone floor. After a short distance, Frank spoke, his voice barely a whisper. The security camera system for the back property just had a login from a secondary account. Only Michael, and I know it exists. I swallowed hard. My mind was reeling, but strangely, my body felt sharp, so alert I could hear water dripping from the pine needles. The path leading to the family burial ground was a red clay trail, flanked by old-growth pines. The recent rain had left the needles heavy and wet. Drops fell on my shoulders, cold and sharp. Fog still clung to the tree trunks like wood smoke. As I walked, I felt like I was entering a dark mouth. The deeper we went, the louder my own sounds became. My breathing, my heartbeat, the sound of me swallowing. Frank stopped, raising a hand. Ahead was the family plot, a few low-lying graves with graying headstones standing silently. Some were old, the inscriptions faded, covered in green moss. The scent of rain and damp earth here was different from inside the house. It mingled with the smell of decaying leaves and made my skin crawl. I bit my lip, my mind flashing back to the scene in the hall. Michael's portrait, the voices divvying up his legacy, and now this place. The silence was so profound it felt like someone was listening. I suddenly understood why Michael's text had filled me with dread. It wasn't about ghosts. It was because the evil of men can sometimes be colder than a grave. Frank led me along a small path around a mound of earth. In the distance was a newly cleared patch of ground. A few temporary stakes were in the ground, the spot they had planned for a memorial cenotaph. I looked at those stakes, and my throat tightened. Just yesterday, I had stood there crying. Now, I was standing here, waiting for the man I thought was dead to emerge. I called out, my voice so soft, it was barely more than a breath. Michael? No one answered. I called again, a little louder. Michael? Still, a suffocating silence. Frank scanned our surroundings, his eyes darting quickly, his hand resting on his jacket pocket like someone always prepared for the worst. I stood motionless, feeling time stretch out, each second thick as mud. I told myself, asterisk, stay calm, stay calm. The righteous have nothing to fear, asterisk. But my heart was still trembling, because sometimes the danger isn't in front of you, but right behind you. Suddenly, from a dense thicket of trees behind the hill, there was a dry, heavy sound, like something being dragged across the wet ground. I jumped, my hand instinctively clutching my dress. Frank immediately stepped in front of me, his voice a low growl. Who's there? The sound came again, closer this time. A figure stumbled out from the trees, its gait unsteady, one leg dragging, the body lurching as if about to fall. The clothes were caked in mud, shoulders soaked, hair matted. I saw a streak of red on his forehead, and then my heart felt like it had been squeezed in a fist. It was Michael. I didn't have time to cry. My legs just gave out, and I crumpled as if my bones had dissolved. Michael took another step, his lips pale blue, his eyes narrowed in pain. He looked at me, and his gaze wasn't that of a man who had returned from the dead, but of someone who had walked through a very long, dark tunnel and was struggling to find his way back. Frank rushed to support him. I scrambled forward, my trembling hands reaching out to touch Michael's jacket. It was cold and damp, but his skin was warm, truly warm. I touched him again, just to be sure this wasn't a hallucination. Michael's voice was a hoarse whisper, just loud enough to hear. Ellie, don't cry. We can't stay here long. Just those few words, and hot tears streamed down my face. I bit my lip until it hurt to keep from sobbing. In that moment, I wanted to hold him tight and never let go, but I was terrified the sound of my crying would bring the entire household running. Frank quickly secured a makeshift splint to Michael's leg, and together, we helped him walk. Michael leaned on us, his breathing ragged, each step like walking on knives. I could hear him hiss softly through his teeth, and my heart constricted, but I couldn't afford to be weak. We turned down a small slope leading to an old storage shed at the foot of the hill. It had a low tin roof and a faded wooden door. Mr. Henderson was already there, holding a thermos of hot water, his expression so grim you knew he understood everything without asking. He said just one thing, his voice heavy as a stone. Get inside quickly. I helped Michael inside. The door closed, and darkness enveloped us. But this time, the darkness didn't scare me, because in the middle of it, I could hear one thing clearly. Michael was breathing. And my life, from that moment on, had entered a completely new game. As soon as the shed door closed, I dared to take a deeper breath, but only just. Outside, the wind whistled through the pines, a thin sound like someone pulling a thread. Water dripped from the old tin roof, a steady times tick, tick, tick times that sent a shiver down my spine. Mr. Henderson switched on a single bare bulb. Its weak yellow light cast long, flickering shadows on the damp wooden walls, making it seem like there was someone else standing with us. Michael sat leaning against an old sack of feed, his lips pale. His leg was crudely splinted, with 2 pieces of wood tied hastily with rope. The gash on his forehead was half-dried, but his eyes were sharp. So sharp it scared me. I knelt, my hands trembling as I opened the first aid kit Mr. Henderson had prepared. In that moment, only one thought filled my mind. Asterisk, he's alive. He's really alive. And the whole family just held his funeral. Asterisk, Frank worked quickly. He tore open a sterile pad, poured antiseptic on it, and bandaged the wound. Michael hissed through his teeth, but didn't cry out. I watched, and it felt like my own chest was being clawed from the inside. I whispered, my voice breaking. Does it hurt? Michael looked at me, the corner of his mouth twitching into a semblance of a reassuring smile. It hurts, but I'm not dead yet. His words made me want to both cry and shiver. I bit my lip, forcing the tears back. When you're cornered, crying loudly only shows your enemy where you're bleeding. Mr. Henderson handed me a cup of warm water. Have him drink this in sips. Don't let him talk too much. Then he turned to Michael, his voice still stern. You stubborn fool. To be alive is a blessing, but to be discovered would be a disaster. Michael nodded faintly. Frank took a small, waterproof burner phone from his pocket and placed it on a wooden crate. Use this to text Ellie. I suspect they found your main phone at the crash site. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, as if swallowing something bitter. I understood then that his survival wasn't just luck. It was an escape measured in heartbeats. I looked at Michael, my voice still shaking, but now determined. Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner? I just, I couldn't say the words. Asterisk held a memorial service for you. Asterisk. Just thinking it was like being pricked by a needle. Michael opened his eyes and looked straight at me, a gaze that silenced me immediately. He spoke slowly, weighing each word. I couldn't risk it. I suspected someone had been tracking my schedule. If I showed my face, they'd know I was alive. They'd erase every piece of evidence I've been gathering. He paused to breathe, then continued. Did you see them? Marching? And right after the service? They had lawyers and managers ready to go in less than half an hour. Do you understand? Ellie? They weren't waiting for confirmation of my death. They just needed the world to times believe times I was dead. I shivered. The image of Victoria striding into the hall, her words, "The dead are gone," echoed in my mind, cold as ice. I suddenly saw all her previous lectures about standards and appearances for what they were, a tablecloth hiding a hand reaching to grab everything. Frank moved a low stool for me, then closed and bolted the shed door again. He whispered, Ellie, from now on, everything has to be kept secret. Someone in that house is getting impatient. They will be searching. I looked at him. Searching for Michael? Frank nodded, his face hardening. And possibly for you. My throat felt raw. I used to think being a good daughter-in-law meant being patient. I used to believe that turning the other cheek brought peace. But here, patience wasn't peace. It was offering your own neck to be strangled. Michael reached out and took my hand. His was warm but trembling slightly, from pain or anger. I couldn't tell. He said, Listen to me. Let Victoria do whatever she wants. You play the part of the devastated widow. The weaker you seem, the more overconfident they'll become. I wanted to protest, but Michael squeezed my hand harder. No arguments. You just have to trust me. Asterisk. Trust me. Asterisk. The words were simple, but in that moment, they felt like a sacred vow. I nodded, though my mind was still spinning. I glanced at Mr. Henderson. He just sighed softly. Life is full of wolves in sheep's clothing, but a straight tree will one day stand tall again. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, his voice low but sharp. Before Dad died, he told me a few things. He didn't trust anyone but me with the critical parts of the business. For the past few months, I've been tracing a strange flow of money, unusual contracts. Someone was altering the data, but I didn't have enough proof. He took a deep breath, sweat beading on his forehead. They made their move first. Hearing that, a chill went down my spine. I didn't ask who they were. A name was already forming in my mind. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the suspicion. It was the truth, which could be even crueler. What do I do now? I asked softly. Michael looked at me, his voice dropping. Go back to the company. Go to my office and get what I hid there. You have to act like a broken woman. But your eyes have to be open. Your ears have to listen. And you absolutely cannot let them know I'm still breathing. Frank nodded. I'll go with you part of the way. I'll drop off near the headquarters. The office has cameras, and their people are there. Mr. Henderson opened his bag and took out a small bottle of smelling salts, placing it in my hand. Take this. When a woman's hands are shaking, people notice. A sniff of this will clear your head. I looked at the small bottle and felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. When did my life become a place where I needed smelling salts just to maintain my composure and protect the secret of my husband's life? Michael was tired, his head lolling against the wall. I pulled a thin blanket over his shoulders. He suddenly whispered my name. Ellie. I leaned in. He spoke very quietly, his warm breath against my ear. Don't be afraid. Fear means they win before we even fight. I nodded, though I wasn't free of fear. I had just found a new way to be afraid. Afraid, but still moving forward. Afraid, but still calm. I understood. From this moment on, I was no longer the Feng Ni who was just trying to please her mother-in-law. I was Michael's wife, and I was the only person standing between the truth and a fake funeral that had been staged all too quickly. Outside, the water still dripped from the tin roof. Inside, the yellow light flickered. I took a deep breath, clutched the bottle of smelling salts, and told myself, Asterisk, you reap what you sow. That's only true when goodness is given a chance. When evil is at your door, even the good have to know how to stand up straight. Asterisk. After a few sips of warm water, Michael's color improved slightly, but his breathing was still labored. Frank sat near the door, his ears tuned to every sound from the pine forest. Mr. Henderson stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, his face that of a man who had seen enough of life to know that some family matters are more dangerous than a street fight. I sat close to Michael, afraid to touch him much for fear of causing him pain. Just seeing the dried mud on his collar and the torn skin on his forehead made my heart ache. Michael whispered, his voice hoarse but clear. I'll tell you quickly, so you understand. Then you have to go back. You can't stay here long. I nodded. My throat was tight, but I forced myself not to cry. Tears wouldn't save anyone now. They would only make me weaker. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then began. That day on the pass, I was on schedule. It was raining lightly, and the fog was thick. As I approached an S-curve, there was a truck ahead of me driving unusually slow. I was about to pass it when two motorcycles pulled up alongside me, one on each side. The one on the left kept swerving, trying to clip my fender. The one on the right stayed glued to my mirror, boxing me in. My blood ran cold. I thought it was an accident. It was a three-sided trap. Michael continued, his voice steady but his eyes darkening. The truck in front suddenly veered across the lane, not like a clumsy driver, but deliberately blocking me. I slammed on the brakes. The tires skidded on the wet road. The two motorcycles squeezed in tighter. In that moment, I knew if I stayed behind the wheel, I'd be pushed right over the edge of the cliff. He put a hand to his chest, breathing with difficulty, as if just recounting it made the pain flare up. I wanted to tell him to stop, but he shook his head. Michael spoke as if dropping each word onto the ground. I had already unbuckled my seatbelt. The driver's side door was jammed from a scrape. I kicked it hard and threw myself out. Just as the car plunged over the guardrail, I landed on a lower ledge of trees. Not as deep as where the car fell, but far enough to knock me out. Frank just clenched his jaw. Mr. Henderson let out a soft, heavy sigh, like someone who had just swallowed his anger. Michael slowed down. I woke up when it was already dark. My main phone was smashed. My head was pounding, and my body ached like every joint had been pulled apart. I didn't dare call for help from nearby. Not out of pride, but because I knew a coordinated maneuver like that couldn't have been random. It required someone who knew the route, the time, and even which car I was driving. I suddenly remembered Michael's warning in the house. Asterisk. Even words have a price. Asterisk. It turned out it wasn't just words. His entire schedule was for sale. Michael looked directly at me. Do you see, Ellie? If there was an inside man, the nearest hospital could have become the place they were waiting for me. I didn't need them to try to kill me a second time. Just them knowing I was still breathing would have been enough for all the evidence to disappear. I nodded, my heart filled with a mixture of fear and rage, a rage so intense my hands went cold. Michael continued. I was prepared. Lately, I've been carrying a waterproof burner phone in my jacket pocket for site visits. I kept it well hidden, and I had set up the backup account to access the security feed for the back property, the land we were planning for the family plot. Only I knew about that account. Frank added quickly, and you saw. The system logged a successful access from that exact account. I swallowed. Everything fit together with a chilling precision, as if someone had been waiting in the wings, ready to pull the curtain the moment Michael disappeared. That night, I crawled along a game trail, avoiding the main road. My leg was killing me. I had to crawl at times, but I pushed myself to get back to the woods behind the house because few people ever go there, and I needed to see what was happening inside the house. When I accessed the cameras, I saw the scene. Victoria marching in with her lawyer and managers right after the memorial service. He stopped, his eyes turning red, but he didn't shed a tear. I looked at his face, and my heart broke. A man who ran an entire corporation, and in that moment, watching that scene, he was just a son being hastily buried by those who wanted to steal everything his father had left him. Michael's voice grew hoarse. When I saw how impatient they were, I knew for sure this was organized. Think about it, Ellie. If it had been a real accident, people would have been in shock. They would have waited, hoped, focused on the search. But they had barely said their goodbyes before they were sitting down to divide the spoils. I remembered Victoria's voice. Asterisk. The company cannot be left without leadership. Asterisk. At the time, I had only thought she was cold. Now I understood that coldness. It was the coldness of someone already standing on the other side of the river. just waiting for their rival to fall, and so they could step forward. I asked quietly, my voice so small, I was afraid it would disturb the air. Who do you suspect? Michael looked at me for a long moment, then said, I'm not naming names yet. I need proof, but just watch how they act. You'll know who benefits the most. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. In life, greed often leads to ruin. But this is a particularly venomous kind of ruin. He looked at me, his gaze both compassionate and stern. Ellie, from now on, you must walk on thin ice. I nodded. I suddenly understood why Michael had texted. Asterisk. Let her do what she wants. Asterisk. This wasn't a fight between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. This was a war between a living man and a trap that had already been sprung. Michael squeezes my hand, his voice low but firm. I'm alive because I managed to jump. But how long I stay alive depends on you keeping the secret. Go back to the house, go back to the company, and let them think you're just a woman on the verge of breaking. The more broken you seem, the more they will reveal themselves. I looked at Michael. I no longer saw myself as the new bride afraid of breaking the rules. I saw myself sitting before a man who had been pushed off a cliff, but was still trying to pull his entire family out of an even deeper abyss. I took a deep breath. The antiseptic smell was sharp, but it cleared my head. I spoke softly, slowly, as if nailing each word into my own heart. Don't worry. I'm going back, and I won't let them bury you a second time. Inside the old shed, after telling his story, Michael was clearly exhausted. He leaned back against the damp wooden wall. His eyes closed for a moment, his breathing still heavy. I watched him, my heart constricting, but I couldn't let my emotions lead. I was afraid that if I softened for even a second, the entire plan would unravel like a torn sweater in the wind. Mr. Henderson pushed a stool towards me, signaling for me to sit down and steady myself. He looked at Michael and spoke softly but firmly. Now, tell her the rest, but make it brief. Ellie has to get back. It's almost dark. Michael gave a slight nod. He opened his eyes and looked at me for a long time, as if to burn every word into my memory. Ellie, there's something Dad did before he passed. He didn't tell anyone, not even Victoria. He only told me. I swallowed hard. In this house, anything kept secret was usually dangerous. Michael said, Dad knew someone in the family was getting restless. So he rearranged a few things. Signing authority for major accounts, approval power at critical risk points, and certain control mechanisms. It's like a two-factor authentication system. To an outsider, it looks simple, but to break it, you need the right set of keys. He paused, his lips pressed into a thin line. Dad loved Dylan. He took him in, raised him, educated him, gave him a place in the family. But Dad only trusted times to carry the weight of the corporation. A legacy like this can't be handed to someone who is both incompetent and full of greed. Mr. Henderson sighed. Your father was a good judge of character. He turned to me. Ellie, listen carefully. The important thing isn't what rights a daughter-in-law has. It's knowing that you're standing in the middle of a crosswind. I nodded. Since marrying into this family, I had thought the issues would be about household customs and etiquette. I never imagined that what they were fighting over was the helm of a massive ship. Michael continued, his voice lower. A few months ago, I started noticing strange expenses. Not huge, obvious amounts, but small, regular payments spread across different departments. Consulting services, system maintenance, temporary staffing. They were split up to avoid attention. When I asked, I was told it was standard procedure. But I knew procedure was just a cover. The person wearing that cover could go wherever they wanted. Frank finally spoke, his voice clipped. I have a preliminary list of the contracts we need to investigate. But I've been locked out of the main server at the company, so I have to use a back channel. He looked at me. When you go back, just watch and listen. If you see anything unusual, remember it, but don't ask too many questions. I looked at Frank and felt a chill. If they had dared to run Michael off the road, what was to stop them from altering his server log? Michael held my hand, his grip warm but weak. I can't reveal myself yet. First, my leg is too injured to walk properly. Second, if I show up now, they'll immediately change their story, shift the blame, destroy evidence, and start playing the victim. Then, it just becomes a shouting match, and words can't beat forged documents. I bit my lip. It was true, you can't fight fate. But if you're not smart, you won't even have a chance to look up at the sky. Mr. Henderson pulled me aside and whispered, when you get back to the house and see Victoria, Call her Victoria, just like always. Be polite, but in your heart, remember, a smile like a flower, a hand holding a knife. Don't let the knife know you've seen it. I shivered. I never thought I'd have to learn how to act in front of my own mother-in-law. Frank took out his phone, tapped it a few times, and showed me the screen. There was a small, innocuous-looking icon. This is a panic button, he said. If you're in trouble, press and hold it for 3 seconds. It will send your location to me and Mr. Henderson. I looked at the icon, my throat tight. When did my life become a place where I needed something like this just to be safe in my own husband's home? Michael looked at me, his voice softening slightly. Go to the company first. Go into my office and get what I left behind. I won't name it here. Just remember, bottom drawer, left side, the place no one ever looks. He paused, then added, his words like a stamp. You have to look truly sad. The more authentic your grief, the better. Don't try to be too strong. They aren't afraid of strong people. They're afraid of people who are aware. I took a deep breath. I had more than enough sadness to spare. I had genuinely mourned at his memorial. The only difference was that from now on, I had to use that sadness as a shield. Before I left, I turned back to look at Michael. He had his eyes closed, his forehead beaded with sweat. I wanted to say so much to ask if he was cold, if he was hungry, if he was scared. But I only managed one short sentence, enough to reassure him. I'm going. I'll be careful. And I won't let anyone suspect you're alive, Mr. Henderson opened the shed door, scanned the area, and gave a signal. Frank went first to scout the path. I followed. I had changed out of my morning dress into the dark clothes Mr. Henderson had prepared, so I wouldn't stand out when I returned to the house. The evening wind cut through the pines, cold and sharp. I pulled my collar up, repeating a phrase my mother always said. Asterisk, constant dripping wears away the stone. Asterisk, I didn't need to win today. I just needed not to break. The dirt path leading back towards the distant lights of the mansion was the same, but my heart had changed. I walked at a steady pace, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to avoid suspicion, and just enough to remind myself that from this moment on, every step I took was a step to protect my husband's life. The next morning, I left the estate while a light fog still clung to the ground. I chose a dark outfit, with just enough makeup to cover the puffiness of my eyes, but not all of it. I needed them to believe I was truly falling apart. I had plenty of grief. I just had to grieve in the right way now. The car headed towards the corporate headquarters in downtown Seattle. The morning traffic was building, the honking of cars, the hum of the city, the shouts of street vendors. The rhythm of normal life felt alien. Just yesterday, I had stood before my husband's symbolic casket. Today, I had to walk into the place where he once commanded 1,000 people, as if I wasn't allowed to collapse. The main lobby of the corporation was as gleaming as ever. The marble floors shone, the air was cool and smelled of industrial cleaner, and the click of employees' heels echoed. But the atmosphere was as tense as a drawn bowstring. People would see me, freeze for a second, then quickly lower their heads and whisper, "Mrs. Vance." Some looked at me with pity. Others avoided my gaze as if I were trouble. I nodded back to them without smiling. I kept my pace slow, my shoulders slightly slumped, the very picture of a person just trying to get through an errand. In my mind, I repeated Michael's words. Asterisk. Don't be too strong. They're afraid of people who are aware. Asterisk. I took the elevator to the executive floor. As the doors opened, I saw Jessica standing near the reception desk, holding a stack of files and talking to another assistant. She turned, saw me, and a smile immediately appeared. Sweet as sugar but cold as ice. Ellie, what are you doing here? You haven't even had time to rest. I looked directly into her eyes, then let my gaze drop to the files in her hand. I spoke slowly. I'm here to collect some of Michael's personal belongings, and there are a few things in his office that I need to keep. I intentionally emphasized the word keep, just slightly, as if by accident. Jessica's smile faltered. Her eyes flickered. Of course, but the office is currently being reorganized. The executive committee is reviewing documents, so please understand. I sighed, my voice just weary enough. I won't touch any company documents. I'm just getting my husband's things. Whose secretary are you, anyway, to be blocking the door to my husband's office? The question wasn't loud or harsh, but it was enough to make her pause. Jessica quickly corrected herself. Oh, no, I'm just following procedure, to prevent anything from being lost. I nodded as if accepting her explanation. Then I added, Still, in that same, even tone, procedure is good. But if even one of his pens goes missing, I'll be asking questions. My husband is gone. I can't bear to lose his things. 2. I said it while looking down, the perfect image of a woman on the verge of tears. But in my head, I was counting her every breath. Jessica was flustered. Just then, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, took 2 steps away to answer it. I didn't need to hear the conversation. The second her back was turned, I walked straight to Michael's office door. It was the same door, but my hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I pushed it open. The scent of wood and faint coffee still lingered, as if he had just stepped out for a meeting. I closed the door behind me and stood still for a moment. Asterisk fortune favors the bold. Asterisk, I told myself. And then I moved quickly to his desk. Everything on the desk had been slightly shifted. A few file folders were stacked more neatly than usual, the neatness of an unfamiliar hand. I swallowed. Asterisk, they've been in here. Asterisk, I opened the top drawer. Empty. The middle drawer, a few miscellaneous papers. I didn't panic. I just did as Michael had said. Asterisk. Bottom drawer. Left side. The place no one ever looks. Asterisk. The drawer was slightly stuck, as if it hadn't been opened in a long time. I pulled a little harder. Asterisk click. Asterisk it opened. Inside was a slim, old brown, leather-bound journal. There was no title on the cover. My heart leaped. I picked it up and quickly flipped through the pages. They were filled with cryptic notes. Not a diary, but the kind of coded shorthand a meticulous person uses. Company names abbreviated, dates, arrows, a few odd numbers. Some lines were circled in red. I didn't dare read it carefully there. I slipped the journal into my handbag and closed the drawer, leaving it exactly as it was. I glanced over at the bookshelf. A photo album had been put back crookedly, as if someone had just picked it up. I straightened it, my heart cold. They had rifled through his memories just to find what they wanted. I heard footsteps outside the door. I immediately stepped back, standing by the window, feigning a dazed look at the parking lot below, a grieving widow lost in thought. The door opened. Jessica came in, followed by Dylan. Dylan was in a suit, his collar crisp, his face a mask of sorrow, but his eyes darted around the room as if taking inventory. He looked at me, his voice feigning gentleness. "Ellie, what are you doing here? You should be resting." I turned, my eyes genuinely red, because I had forced myself to think of the moment I had stood before Michael's portrait. I said, "I'm getting my husband's things. He was always so tidy. I don't want his belongings to fall into a stranger's hands." Dylan gave a faint, humorless smile. "Who's a stranger in this company, Ellie?" I looked at him directly. "Anyone who enters this room without Michael's permission is a stranger." As I said it, I saw Jessica's grip tighten on her files, her knuckles turning white. Dylan walked over to the desk, leaned on it, his voice lowering. "Don't misunderstand. The company is in a difficult position right now. My mother is trying to stabilize things, and I'm just temporarily shouldering the burden so people don't say our family is in chaos." I nodded slightly, as if I didn't have the energy to argue. Then I asked one simple question, my tone as light as a casual inquiry, but I knew it was a needle. "If you're temporarily shouldering the burden, who gave you the authority to do so? Is there a board resolution? Or did you all manage to divide up the roles right after you said goodbye to Michael?" The temperature in the room dropped. Dylan's eyes narrowed. Jessica stared at me as if she could see right through me. I didn't say another word. Words are precious. Once you've made your point, you stop. Saying more just leads to mistakes. I lowered my head, my voice hoarse. "I'm going home. I'm tired." I walked out without looking back, but I could feel their eyes on me, following me like I was a handbag hiding something they feared. When the elevator doors closed, I finally dared to breathe deeply. My hand rested on my bag, on the brown leather journal. A small object, but it felt as hot as a burning coal. I knew that from this moment on, I wasn't just a grieving widow. I was holding a piece of the truth's backbone. And when the paper is torn, you have to hold on to the edge. I had to hold on tight, because if I dropped it even once, they would tear the rest of it to shreds. I exited the elevator and walked through the executive floor hallway, my heart still pounding from the leather journal in my bag. It wasn't a warmth of joy, but of fear. Fear that I was holding the very thing they would stop at nothing to get. Before I could get far, my phone buzzed. An internal, unknown number. I answered, and a hushed, frantic voice whispered on the other end, "Mrs. Vance?" They're holding an emergency meeting in the main conference room. Mr. Dillon is talking about delegating operational authority. The lawyer is there, and so are the managers loyal to Victoria. The line went dead, as if the person was afraid of being caught. I stood still for a beat, my heart hammering. Michael's words flashed in my mind. Asterisk. The weaker you seem, the more overconfident they'll become. But you have to be aware. Asterisk. I looked at my reflection in a large glass panel. I saw a woman with puffy eyes, pale lips, and slightly slumped shoulders. The grief was real, but the awareness had to be real, too. I walked towards the main conference room. The glass doors were frosted, and the white fluorescent light from within felt cold. I could hear Dylan's voice, confident and clear, the voice of a man trying on a new role. During this transitional period, to avoid any impact on existing contracts, I proposed that the executive committee agree on a temporary approval mechanism. Another voice, deeper and more measured, likely the lawyer, Mr. Wallace, chimed in. Temporary is the appropriate term, but it must be documented with minutes, signatures, and a legal basis to avoid future disputes. I put a hand to my chest and took a deep, steadying breath. Asterisk. Fortune favors the prepared. Asterisk. I didn't believe in magic charms, but I believed in keeping a cool head. I smoothed my hair, quickly wiped the corner of my eye, and pushed the door open. The moment the door opened, the entire room fell silent. Heads turned towards me, some with surprise, others with annoyance. Victoria was seated at the head of the table, her black suit elegant, her posture perfect, her hands resting on the table like a chairperson. Dylan stood next to the projector screen, a laser pointer still in his hand. Jessica sat below, her notebook open. Mr. Wallace sat to the side, his briefcase placed neatly beside him, his expression placid, as if he were watching a play unfold just as scripted. I didn't ask for permission, nor did I apologize. I simply walked to the front row of chairs, pulled one out, and sat down very slowly enough that no one could accuse me of causing a disturbance. I placed my handbag on my lap and clasped my hands over it to hide their trembling. Dylan forced a smile. Ellie, what are you doing here? Company matters should be handled by the executive committee. I looked up at him, my voice hoarse but clear. I'm here to listen, because this matter directly concerns my husband and me. Victoria's eyebrows furrowed slightly, her voice still smooth but now tinged with ice. You're in mourning. You should be resting at home. This is all technical business. I nodded, as if acknowledging my lack of expertise. Then I spoke, each word deliberate. Yes, I won't interfere with technical matters. I just want to ask one question about proper procedure. The air in the room grew heavy. I saw a few managers exchange glances. Asterisk. A daughter-in-law daring to question procedure here. Asterisk. I turned to Dylan, my voice just loud enough to make them fall silent. You mentioned temporary operational authority. What is the legal basis for this temporary status? Where is the resolution from the board of directors? Where are the minutes of authorization? And have the legal rights of Michael's lawful spouse, in terms of shareholding and legal standing, been formally acknowledged by the legal department in this matter? My questions fell onto the conference table like stones. No one spoke. Dylan blinked rapidly, searching for words. Jessica froze, the pen in her hand hovering over her notebook. Mr. Wallace adjusted his glasses, looking at me for a longer moment, for the first time seeming to weigh his options. Dylan stammered. Ellie, you're being emotional. This is an emergency. The company needs someone to step up. I nodded, still calm. An emergency requires even stricter adherence to the law. The king's rule ends where the village's begins, might be a quaint saying, but a corporation doesn't run on customs. If a dispute arises tomorrow, who takes responsibility? You? Your mother? Or the entire executive committee? Someone at the end of the table cleared his throat. Another person looked down at his documents, avoiding Victoria's gaze. I knew I had hit a nerve. They wanted to move fast, but moving fast without the proper paperwork could get them all into trouble. Victoria placed her hand lightly on the table, her voice as smooth as honey. Your questions are valid, Ellie, but you must also understand that our family is in turmoil. If something has happened to Michael, someone must take care of things. I looked at her, suppressing a wave of nausea at the phrase "if something has happened." I replied, still respectful. Yes, I understand. But until there is an official legal determination, all decisions regarding his title and signing authority must follow the company's bylaws. I am only asking to see the relevant documents and minutes, so that later, our family isn't accused of acting in haste. When I said the word accused, I saw a few people flinch. In the business world, a bad reputation is feared most of all. A good name is better than a fine coat. Everyone in that room understood that. Mr. Wallace spoke up, his voice less confident than before. Mrs. Vance is correct, in principle. In a situation without legal confirmation, any substitute mechanism must be handled with extreme caution. I suggest we temporarily suspend the finalization of signing authority today, pending a full review of the bylaws and existing powers of attorney by the legal department. Dylan turned to the lawyer, his face flushing. Mr. Wallace? Victoria looked at Wallace, her eyes flashing with a sharp light. Then she turned back to me. This time, she wasn't looking at me like an outsider. She spoke slowly. What do you want, Ellie? I lowered my head slightly. I don't want anything for myself right now. I just want the company to operate correctly, and I want everyone to remember that Michael is my husband. Until someone has the right to declare what has become of him, please do not treat him like an empty chair. The room was utterly silent. I stood up, picked up my handbag, and said nothing more. I didn't need to win a meeting. I just needed to plant a seed of doubt in their minds. I was no longer the woman who would stand silently behind a memorial portrait. I walked out of the room, closing the door very gently. So gently that no one could accuse me of being disruptive. But I knew that from this moment on, they would begin to fear me in a different way. They would fear the woman they thought was broken, who had somehow learned to pull on the right legal threads to tighten the noose around them. I left the conference room, my throat still as dry as if I had swallowed a handful of ash. The executive floor hallway felt excessively cold and bright, the kind of light that lets people see each other too clearly, forcing them to hide even more carefully. I didn't look back at anyone, just walked steadily, clutching my handbag to my side. Inside it, the brown leather journal was still there, like a small ember, not hot to the touch, but a burn waiting to happen. By the time I reached the elevator, I finally allowed myself a long sigh. Not out of fear, but because I knew I had just poked a hornet's nest. As the elevator doors closed, the image of Victoria in the meeting room lingered. Her eyes were no longer those of a mother-in-law upholding standards. They were the eyes of someone trying to calculate just how much her daughter-in-law knew, and what else she might be hiding. Down in the lobby, I feigned a moment of dizziness, stumbling slightly as if exhausted. A few employees rushed to help. I waved a hand gently. I'm fine, just a little lightheaded. I needed them to believe I was truly weak. Asterisk bend with the wind. Asterisk. In this fight, I had to be pliable at the right moments to make them lower their guard. The moment I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A text from Frank. Just a few words, asterisk, go to a secure place. I'm sending something, asterisk. My heart gave a lurch. I got in my car, but instead of heading straight for the estate, I drove to a small, quiet coffee shop nearby. It was the kind of place with secluded corners, soft music, and few customers. I chose a table against the wall, my back to the entrance. In this world, some secrets don't need to be shouted. They just need to be caught by a single wandering eye. Frank sent a series of screenshots and a few brief, typically concise notes. I opened them, my eyes scanning quickly as a chill spread down my spine. There were the small, regular payments, with innocuous-sounding descriptions, consulting services, systems, maintenance, temporary staffing. But the dates of the transfers corresponded exactly with the periods when Michael had started traveling frequently for project surveys. One note traced a payment from a shell company, Subsidiary A, to a personal account, and then to a business named Summit Enterprises. When I read the name Summit Enterprises, my heart skipped a beat. I remembered seeing a man from that company at a corporate gala, shaking Victoria's hand with the easy familiarity of an old acquaintance. Below, Frank had added another message. Asterisk, access logs were wiped from the main server, but the backup server still has a shadow copy. I'm working on restoring the rest. Asterisk. Just that one sentence told me everything. They weren't just greedy. They had a habit of cleaning up their tracks, like wiping a table after a feast. I put my phone down, my fingers unconsciously gripping the edge of my water glass. My mind replayed the image of Michael crawling through the woods and the scene of Victoria arriving with her lawyer less than an hour after the memorial service. The puzzle pieces were beginning to lock together. The terrifying part was how perfectly they fit. Just then, Mr. Henderson called, his voice low. Ellie, come by my place for a moment. I found something of Arthur's. He left it behind, and I never had a chance to give it to Michael. My throat tightened. Yes, I'm on my way. Mr. Henderson lived in a small, quiet house not far from the estate, the kind with a peaceful, private garden. When I arrived, he handed me a faded, slightly worn manila envelope. While I was clearing out Arthur's study after the funeral, he said, "I found this tucked behind a file cabinet. It's a letter he started writing, but I don't think he ever finished or signed it." I opened it. Inside were a few pages of handwritten notes. The script was that of an older man, firm and straight. I didn't read it all aloud, just scanned it. But one passage made my heart grow heavy. My father-in-law wrote about someone in the family who, despite living under the same roof, did not have the family's best interests at heart. He warned Michael to be careful with documents and with those closest to him. And there was one line, like a final admonition. Asterisk, protect the roots. Don't let others chop them down. Asterisk. I sat in silence. Mr. Henderson sighed. You see, a grand house isn't always a blessing. Sometimes, it's just bait. I nodded, my eyes stinging. I didn't know how much my father-in-law had suspected, but I knew he hadn't died in ignorance. Old men sometimes say little, but they see deep. Leaving his house, I drove back to the company one more time at the end of the day. I didn't go to the executive floor. I went to the administrative department, under the pretext of retrieving some of Michael's personal items from the archives. I needed to see what they had touched and who was getting desperate. The archives were in a back corridor, dimly lit, smelling of old paper and cold air conditioning. Just as I turned the corner, I saw Jessica. She wasn't in her office as usual, but was wearing a light coat, clutching a box of files, her eyes darting around nervously. When she saw me, she jumped, then immediately forced a smile. "Ellie, you're still here?" I looked at the box of files and asked softly, "Are you in charge of the archives now too?" Jessica hesitated for a second, then replied, "I'm just assisting with a review. We don't want any important papers to get lost." I nodded and took a step closer, close enough for her to catch the faint scent of smelling salts on me. I kept my voice low but clear. Company documents belong to the company. Anyone who touches them without proper authorization might have to answer questions if the police get involved. No one will be able to protect you then. Jessica's face paled. She tried to laugh it off. "Why would you say something so morbid? I'm just doing my job." I looked directly into her eyes and let a sentence drop, as if it were a random, grief-stricken thought. Some people think they're safe because the world believes someone is gone, but there are still eyes watching and ears listening. It's just not time to speak yet. I saw Jessica's hand tighten on the edge of the box, her knuckles turning white. She swallowed hard. The fear of the guilty always betrays them faster than the reaction of the innocent. I didn't threaten her further. I just took half a step back, my tone once again polite. "I'm heading home now. You carry on with your work. Just remember to follow procedure." Then I turned and walked away without looking back. It wasn't until I reached the lobby that I realized my back was damp with sweat. I'm not a good actress, but in this house, if you don't act, you get acted upon. I remembered something my mother used to say. Asterisk. A tree that doesn't bend will break. Asterisk. I didn't want to be crooked. I just wanted to survive, to protect the man I loved, and to protect the roots my father-in-law had warned me about. That night, when I returned to the estate, I greeted Victoria as usual, bowing my head like a dutiful, mourning daughter-in-law. But inside, I was different. I no longer looked at this house with the eyes of someone seeking acceptance. I looked at it with the eyes of someone memorizing every footprint. That night, I returned to the estate in silence. Victoria was sitting in the living room, the lamplight casting shadows on her high cheekbones, her expression as serene as if there had never been a funeral. Dylan was there too, tapping furiously on his phone. I walked in and bowed my head respectfully. "Good evening, Victoria." She just nodded, her eyes fixed on the news channel, but her words landed like a well-aimed dart. "You were out all day. Are you tired?" The question sounded like concern, but I knew it was a probe. I answered with the exact voice of a woman breathless with grief. "Yes, exhausted. I'm going up to my room to rest." Victoria gave a very slight smile. "Go on, rest. Don't think too much." Then she turned to Dylan, her voice low but just loud enough for me to overhear. "Review all the access logs. For the house and the office." I walked up the stairs, a chill creeping up my spine. They were starting to hunt. Not for me, but for what I knew, and for the possibility that Michael was still alive. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, listening to the steady hum of the AC and the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At one point, they paused very softly outside my door, then continued on. I wasn't sure if it was Maria or one of Victoria's people, but that pause alone was enough to make my back break out in a cold sweat. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house had changed completely. Victoria ate breakfast quickly, speaking even less than usual. Dylan was texting as he ate, his face agitated. I overheard him mutter, "She didn't just come up with those legal questions on her own. Someone must be coaching her." Victoria set down her cup, her voice as thin as a leaf. "Coached or not, we just need to make sure she has no more ground to ask." I swallowed hard. Asterisk. No more ground to ask. Asterisk. That phrase needed no further explanation. When I got to the office, I tried to walk normally, but I could feel eyes on my back. In the lobby, the two security guards who usually greeted me warmly just gave me a long, searching look. On the executive floor, some employees avoided me like the plague. Others looked like they wanted to speak, but didn't dare. A woman from administration discreetly grabbed my arm as I passed and whispered, "Be careful. There have been a lot of strangers coming and going lately." I nodded without asking questions. In situations like this, asking too many questions was like painting a target on your own back. Around noon, I was summoned to a meeting with a group of managers to discuss family benefits during a crisis. I knew it was a soft trap. They wanted me to reveal an emotion, a piece of information, or an unusual amount of confidence. I went in, sat down, and only offered harmless platitudes. "I just hope for the company's stability. I'm not strong enough to do anything right now. I'm just so confused." I was acting with the real confusion in my heart, so no one could see the facade. But the most terrifying thing was that Dylan was starting to panic. The panic of a new driver whose car is already careening downhill. He was constantly changing approval procedures, calling department heads into his office for private meetings, and pressuring them to sign temporary memos with vague, ambiguous language. Jessica was running around like a headless chicken, clutching files to her chest, her face paler than usual. I didn't need to ask to understand. When people are in a hurry, it means they're scared. That afternoon, as I was leaving the office, my phone rang. An unknown number. The person on the other end didn't speak at first, just breathed. I was about to hang up when a man's hoarse voice came through. "Ellie Vance? Stay still. Don't turn around." My heart jumped. I kept walking slowly, without turning. The voice continued, low as a whisper. "Walk straight ahead to the coffee cart at the end of the block. Sit at the outside table. I'll say what I need to say, then I'm gone." I don't know why I listened. Maybe because, in my gut, I already suspected something. People who do dirty work are often the most afraid of being buried with the secret. It was a small cart with a tarp roof and a few plastic tables. I sat down, my hands on my knees to hide their shaking. A man approached, wearing a dark jacket, a thin scar on his neck. He sat across from me without ordering anything, his eyes darting around. "Name's Jimmy. People call me Scar Jimmy," he said, getting straight to the point. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to say one thing, because this whole mess has gotten out of hand." I kept my voice even. "I don't know what you're talking about." Scar Jimmy let out a dry laugh. "Oh, I think you do. That business on the mountain pass? That wasn't an accident." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "The people who hired us are getting nervous. They think Michael might not be dead after all. And when they get nervous, they get reckless." My hands went ice cold. I gripped the edge of my chair, trying not to show it. "What do you want?" Scar Jimmy leaned in, his voice a rasp. "I want to live. A guy like me, once the job's done, I'm a loose end. If they think I know too much, they'll silence me first. I looked at you, and I can see you're getting dragged into this. So I'm telling you now so you can watch your back." I looked at him slowly. "Watch my back from what?" Jimmy's answer was blunt. "From being taken. Victoria has people following you. Not just at the office, but on your way home. They want to know who you're meeting. And if they become convinced Michael's alive, they'll make you talk. And you can guess what make you talk means." My throat felt like sandpaper. The image of Michael lying in the old shed flashed in my mind, along with his words, asterisk, "Don't let them know I'm still breathing." Asterisk, I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. "Why are you telling me this?" Scar. Jimmy's lip curled. "Because you don't seem like the type to go running your mouth. Besides, in life, you get what you give. I say my piece now, so if I end up getting dealt with later, my conscience is a little clearer." He stood up quickly. Before leaving, he leaned down and whispered, "Don't go home alone. And you better have something on your phone to call for help. Don't trust a single person in that house. He disappeared, leaving an untouched glass of iced tea on the table. I sat for exactly 1 more minute, then stood up. As I walked back out onto the street, the afternoon sun was still golden. The traffic was still heavy, but my world had gone dark. The calm was too quiet, the kind of quiet before a tornado hits. I got to a secure location and relayed the information to Frank using our prearranged code. He called back immediately, his voice urgent. "You can't risk this anymore, Ellie. Let me pull you out for a while." Michael agrees. "We need to fall back and keep you safe." I was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "If I fall back now, they'll erase everything. If I can't secure the evidence, Michael being alive won't save him from a lifetime of legal battles. I just need a little more time." Frank sighed heavily, as if restraining his anger. "Then you have to follow the safety plan exactly." He reminded me about the panic button, told me to vary my routes home, never to be alone in an isolated place, not to accept drinks from anyone, and to refuse any invitations for private talks. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at the woman with dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. A saying came to mind. Asterisk. The tree wishes for calm, but the wind will not cease. Asterisk. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to protect my husband, my home, a normal life. But when the storm rises from within your own house, you can no longer close your eyes to it. I slipped my phone deep into my pocket, my thumb hovering over the panic button for a 3-second test, then releasing. I told myself I hoped I would never have to use it. But at this point, it was better to be prepared. Because in their game, one moment of carelessness from me could be paid for with Michael's life. And my own. The afternoon sky opened up suddenly, the way it does in the Pacific Northwest, sunny one moment, dark and pouring the next. I had just left the office, planning to stop by a pharmacy to buy more medical supplies for Mr. Henderson to take up to the shed, when my phone buzzed with a text from an internal number. Asterisk Ellie. You need to come back to the estate. Victoria is asking for you. Asterisk. I looked at the screen, my heart tightening. If Victoria was asking, it meant she was impatient. I didn't head back immediately. I changed my route, driving through a busy commercial street, trying to stay in public view. But as I turned onto a road flanked by warehouses and industrial lots, the traffic thinned. I saw a car in my rearview mirror, tailing me at a steady distance, not too close, but never falling behind. I told myself to stay calm. I managed to get my phone out, my thumb already resting on the panic button in my pocket. Asterisk. Just 3 seconds. Asterisk. I thought. Asterisk. And Frank will get the signal. Asterisk. A short honk from behind. The car sped up, veered slightly in front of me, forcing me to slow down. Before I could react, another car pulled up alongside me, blocking my escape. I slammed on the brakes, my palms instantly cold and clammy. Asterisk. The calm before the storm. Asterisk. The phrase echoed in my head like a curse. 2 men got out. They didn't shout or attack. They just opened my car door, their voices low and commanding. "Don't make a scene. Come with us. We just need to talk, and then you can go home." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who are you?" "I'm calling the police." One of them smirked. "Go ahead. But do you think you'll have time?" I was pulled into the other car. It all happened quickly, but with a practiced, unnerving efficiency. I struggled, but it was useless. I just managed to jam my hand into my pocket and press and hold the panic button for exactly 3 seconds. The phone gave a slight vibration in my pocket. The signal was sent. I was taken to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. A metal roll-up door screeched open and then slammed shut behind us. It was dark and cold inside, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and damp dust. A figure was standing at the far end of the warehouse. I didn't need a clear look to recognize her. Victoria. She wasn't wearing her usual elegant attire. She had on dark clothes, her hair pulled back tightly, her face mostly free of makeup. The lack of artifice only made the coldness of her expression more stark. There was no serene smile, no talk of family standards, just a pair of dry, sharp, and impatient eyes. She walked towards me, looking me up and down, and then said directly, "Eleanor, where's Michael?" I swallowed hard. I still addressed her out of habit, but my voice was no longer soft. "Victoria, what are you doing? What do you want from me?" Victoria let out a short, harsh laugh. "You're asking me what I want? I want to know if he's alive or dead. If he's truly dead, I can proceed. If he's alive, I have to crush him now, before he crushes me." Her words sent a chill down my spine. So ruthless and naked it was as if she were talking about squashing an insect. I looked at her, and no longer saw my mother-in-law. I saw a woman so terrified of losing power she had gone mad. I tried to remain calm and asked, "How can you say that? Aren't you afraid of karma?" Victoria's teeth ground together. Karma? Karma is what weak people tell themselves to justify their own defeat. I haven't gotten where I am in life because of karma. I've gotten here by seizing opportunities. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You tell me where he is, and I'll let you walk away. You don't, and I'll make sure your parents never know a moment of peace. She mentioned my father's name. The name of the market where my mother worked, details only someone who had them followed would know. I felt the blood rush to my face. My family's honor dangled in front of me like a knife to my throat. I clenched my jaw and forced out the words, "I don't know." Victoria slapped me. It wasn't hard enough to knock me down, but it was sharp, stinging, and humiliating. My vision went dark for a second. The two men held my arms tightly. Victoria leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "You think you're tough? Let me tell you something. I run that house. Michael is gone. Who's going to protect you now? Henderson, that little assistant?" I swallowed, fighting not to tremble. I remembered Michael's words. Asterisk. Fear means they win before we even fight. Asterisk. I looked up, directly into her eyes, my voice hoarse. "What you're doing is illegal." Victoria froze for half a second, then laughed coldly. "The law? If I were afraid of the law, I wouldn't be standing here." She signaled to the men beside her, and they pulled me back. I heard the sound of a chain being dragged across the concrete floor, and the rain drumming on the tin roof sounded like a clock ticking down. I wasn't praying for a miracle. I was just praying the location signal had reached Frank. I tried to buy time with words, both to keep my own head clear and to stop her from doing something reckless. "Whatever you want, let the police handle it. The more you do this, the more you expose yourself." Victoria's eyes blazed. "Shut up." She raised her hand as if to slap me again. Just then, we heard the squeal of tires outside the warehouse, followed by the sound of running feet and a loud, authoritative shout. "Police! Open up!" Victoria froze. The two men holding me exchanged panicked glances. In a matter of seconds, her air of control vanished. She whipped around towards the door, her voice a low growl. "Who called them?" The warehouse door was forced open, and flashlight beams cut through the darkness. I saw Frank rush in first, his face a mask of fury. Behind him were Mr. Henderson and several uniformed police officers. One officer stepped forward, his voice firm. "Are you Eleanor Vance? We received a distress signal and a report. Who is holding you here?" Before I could answer, Victoria snapped. "This is a misunderstanding. It's a family matter." The officer cut her off, his tone professional but unyielding. "A family matter does not grant you the right to unlawfully detain someone, take them to a secluded location, and threaten them. I'm going to need everyone to stay where they are and show me your identification." Frank ran to my side and helped me up. As I stood, the stinging pain in my cheek flared. "Mr. Henderson looked at Victoria, his expression a mixture of sorrow and steel. "Victoria, it's come to this, and you still won't stop." Victoria looked around as if searching for an escape route, but every exit was blocked. Jessica wasn't there. Dylan wasn't there. She was alone, exposed, every line of fear on her face illuminated by the police flashlights. For the first time, I saw her look truly afraid. The police began taking statements on the spot. The two men with her were taken into custody. Victoria kept trying to maintain her composure. I just asked her to come here to talk, but her words lacked their usual sharpness. They sounded hollow, like an actress on a stage after the audience has left. I sat down on a concrete step, my hands still shaking, but a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't satisfaction, it was relief, because I knew that evil had just been dragged out of the shadows, caught red-handed in the very place it thought was safest. Frank leaned down and whispered, just for me to hear, "You did it. You pressed the button in time." I nodded, and tears finally streamed down my face. This time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of knowing that I had just kept Michael alive for another day and saved myself from being suffocated in that cold, dark warehouse. I was driven back in the rainy night. A police car led the way. Frank sat beside me in silence, his eyes constantly scanning the road. Mr. Henderson sat behind me and placed a hand on my shoulder, a gentle, comforting gesture from an older man that needed no words. My cheeks still throbbed from Victoria's slap, but the pain kept my mind sharp. I was no longer in a gray area. From the moment in that warehouse, this had crossed the line from a family dispute into a criminal matter. As soon as we reached a secure location, I opened my handbag and took out the brown leather journal and the letter from Mr. Henderson. Frank placed a USB drive on the table. He spoke concisely. I've secured a portion of the data from the backup server. It's not enough to prove everything, but it's enough to show an anomalous flow of funds and evidence of deleted access logs. I looked at the tiny USB drive and felt like I was holding a massive weight light in my hand, but heavy with consequences. The next morning, the corporation was forced to convene an emergency meeting. The official reason was to stabilize operations following recent events and to cooperate with an investigation into a security incident involving executive family members. But everyone knew the truth. The news of an unlawful detention, happening while the family was still in mourning, had sent shockwaves through the company. A good name is better than a fine coat, and this time, the Vance family's reputation had been torn to shreds in front of its partners. I walked into the conference room wearing a simple dark suit, my hair pulled back neatly. I wore minimal makeup. The red mark on my cheek was still visible. I didn't cover it. Some marks shouldn't be hidden. They speak louder than words. In the room, besides the executive committee, were members of the legal department, internal security, and a few law enforcement officers present to begin their formal inquiry. Dylan sat in a corner, his face ashen, his eyes darting around nervously. Victoria was no longer at the head of the table. She sat off to the side, her posture still straight, but her eyes had lost their command. Mr. Wallace sat beside her, flipping through documents incessantly like a man searching for a loophole to save his client. I didn't look at them for long. I set down my bag, took out the USB drive, the leather journal, and the handwritten letter. I spoke, my voice not loud, but every word was clear. I am not here to fight for a position. I am here to find out who is turning this corporation into their personal piggy bank and who pushed my husband to his death. The room was completely silent. I saw a few of the older managers who had been loyal to Arthur lower their heads. They weren't bad people. They had just been afraid. But in a corporation, people follow power. And this time, power was beginning to shift. I turned to the legal department. First, could you please confirm for me that, in the absence of a legal declaration regarding Michael's status, all decisions to change signing authority or operational command must follow the company's bylaws and resolutions of the board of directors? Is that correct? The head of legal nodded. That is the correct procedure. I nodded back and placed the USB drive on the table. This contains transaction data, system access logs, and several consulting and service contracts with questionable patterns. I am not accusing anyone of a crime in this room, but I am stating that there are deleted records. There is a circular flow of money. There are intermediary companies, and there was an unseemly rush to legitimize power just hours after a tragedy. Dylan jumped up. You have no right to imply I cut him off, very gently. Calm down, Dylan. The data and the authorities will determine who is right and who is wrong. But I will say this directly. Anyone who continues to cover up illicit financial transfers, data tampering, or threats against another person will share in the consequences. The atmosphere in the room changed. People started looking at each other, as if trying to decide which side was safer. A man I recognized as Mr. Davies, the CFO, suddenly cleared his throat. He asked to speak, his voice hoarse. I propose we immediately clarify all questionable fund transfers. If this is prolonged, the liability risk will spread to the entire department. I looked at him and understood immediately. The weakest link was beginning to crack. People are not loyal to evil. They are loyal to their own self-preservation. Mr. Davies continued, looking down at the table. Some of the transfer orders, I was instructed to sign quickly for urgent reasons. Sometimes Dylan called. Sometimes Jessica brought the paperwork. When I asked, I was told it had been cleared by legal. I admit I was wrong not to double-check. Jessica wasn't in the meeting, but her name being mentioned caused a ripple of whispers. Mr. Wallace gripped his pen tighter. Victoria stared at Davies, her eyes like chips of ice. But this time, her coldness had lost its power to intimidate. I opened the brown leather journal to a page with a red circle. I didn't read it all, just pointed to the dates that coincided with the payments Davies had just mentioned. I said, Michael made these notes before the accident. That means he had suspected this for a long time. And his car was run off the road right after this period. Dylan shot to his feet. You're making baseless accusations. What proof do you have? I looked at him directly. I'm not drawing conclusions. I'm just arranging the puzzle pieces. You're panicking because you know the pieces fit. It was then that Victoria finally spoke, her voice struggling for composure. Eleanor, you're overreacting. You're emotional because of what happened yesterday. I was just worried about you, about the family. I turned to her slowly. You were worried about the family by having your daughter-in-law abducted, taken to a warehouse, and threatening her parents? I pointed to my cheek. Is this marked from your worry, Victoria? Then I placed the handwritten letter on the table. This is what Arthur left behind. He warned Michael to be wary of those who live in this house, but whose hearts are not with this family. A few of the older members in the room sighed. One shook his head. The mask of Victoria's standards was crumbling, not because I had berated her, but because her own actions had exposed her in front of everyone. Just then, the conference room door opened. There was no announcement, just a light knock, and then a figure walked in. Michael. He was on crutches, his legs still injured, but his back was straight. His face was thinner, his lips still pale, but his eyes were cold and bright. The entire room froze. Dylan's mouth hung open, but no sound came out. Victoria shot to her feet, her face white as a sheet, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to keep from falling. Mr. Wallace was stunned, blinking as if he were seeing a ghost. I didn't cry. I just felt my chest, which had been tight for so long, finally release. It was like holding your breath for too long and finally being able to breathe. Michael didn't say much. He scanned the room, then spoke just a few sentences, his voice hoarse but firm. I'm alive, and I've seen everything. From the memorial service to the meeting to divide my power. I don't need anyone's pity. I just need the truth. He looked towards Victoria and Dylan, not raising his voice, but each word was like a razor. Anyone who thought they could bury me in the eyes of the world to steal my father's legacy has gone too far. A law enforcement officer stood up and began a quiet discussion with the legal and internal security teams about coordinating the investigation. Michael handed them another storage device that Frank had prepared, containing supplementary camera logs and cross-reference data. He didn't fight with words. He let the data and due process do the work. That was what left the other side with no more room to perform. Dylan began to shake his head. Michael, Michael cut him off, very softly. You just wanted the chair, Dylan. But this chair isn't for someone who builds their power on the fear of others. Victoria tried to regain her voice. Michael. Michael looked at her for a long moment, then said one thing that made the whole room go cold. You arrived at my memorial service 30 minutes late, and you brought a lawyer. I will remember that for the rest of my life. No one clapped. There was no dramatic applause. But I could see those who had been wavering begin to align with the truth. Because when evil is dragged into the light, it is no longer as frightening as it was in the shadows. In the days that followed, things weren't cleaned up in a single meeting, but the wheels of justice had begun to turn. The unlawful detention was a clear starting point. From there, the investigation into the flow of money, the contracts, the data tampering, and the connection to hired thugs expanded. Dylan was detained for questioning regarding his role in directing and concealing the plot. Victoria faced legal proceedings for the kidnapping and her related involvement. Mr. Wallace was no longer a trusted advisor. Everything had to go through the authorities and an independent legal review. As for me, I didn't become some kind of hero. I was just a wife who had stood before her husband's memorial, then stood up to protect one thing, the truth, until it could speak for itself. One night, much later, we were on the rooftop of the headquarters. The wind was cool, and the city below glittered like fallen stars. Michael held my hand, his hand still warm, still real. He said, without you, Ellie, I wouldn't have just lost my life. I would have lost my father's honor. I looked down at the city and thought of the old saying about reaping what you sow. I still believed in doing good, but I also understood something I had been reluctant to admit before. Goodness is a virtue, not a vulnerability. One person cannot stand alone. If I hadn't pressed that panic button that day, if I hadn't dared to ask the right questions at the right time, if I had just thought that being patient was enough, then evil would have won, carried to victory by my silence. The lesson I learned was this. In a family, love and cherish each other. But when trouble comes, you must look closely. Because sometimes, a spark too close to the straw will eventually catch fire. Greed isn't born overnight. It's nurtured by the closed eyes of good people. And when you have to stand up straight, speak the truth, and do the right thing, to clear a path for the law and the truth to walk.